Good morning, everyone. It's 10:03, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today for our monthly ECAP Recap webinar. My name is Shanna Weber, and I'm an environmental education specialist with the Environmental Assistance Branch here at the Kentucky Department for Environmental Protection. And we are super excited that you were able to join us this morning as we learn just a little bit more about the Kentucky Brownfield program. I'm really excited to learn a little bit more as well, so I think today will be a great webinar. Now, before I do hand the presentation over to our guest speaker today and we dive into this topic, I first do want to do just a little bit of webinar housekeeping. And then I'm going to give you just a short idea of what the Environmental Compliance Assistance Program is and how we might be able to help you. So we will go ahead and get started this morning. So first things first, if you are here with us and you can hear me and see the slides, you should be pretty much all set. Everyone besides our presenters are in listen-only mode, so you won't have access to your microphone or camera. But if you do have any questions at all throughout the webinar, we do ask that you use the questions feature, and we will try to get to your questions at the end of today's webinar. I will say we have had some issues in the past with attendees being able to see the slides. If you are having this problem, feel free to leave the meeting and join back in. That seems to help a lot of the times, but feel free to let us know if you do have any other questions. So like I said, I am going to give a bit of an overview on the Environmental Compliance Assistance Program, or ECAP for short, just so you get a little bit of an idea on who we are and how we're able to provide today's event, and just a little bit more on what we do. So as I said, ECAP stands for the Environmental Compliance Assistance Program. And I say this every single time I give this presentation. If you take anything away from my short talk today, I hope that you take away that ECAP is genuinely here to help. So the program itself has two main objectives. The first is going to be to help businesses understand and comply with Kentucky's environmental requirements. And then the second is going to be to provide free and confidential assistance to Kentucky's businesses. And we do this in a variety of ways in which we're going to see in the next couple of slides. Now, ECAP actually acts as Kentucky's Small Business Environmental Assistance Program, or we call those SBEAPs for short. SBEAPs are going to be requirements of the Clean Air Act. So for that reason, we are primarily funded by facilities air emission fees. We do specialize as a program in providing air quality assistance specifically to small businesses in Kentucky. Now, SBEAPs do have their own definition of a small business. They have to be less than 100 employees. They have to be independently owned and operated. And finally, they cannot be a major source of air emissions. So if your facility falls under those categories, you may be eligible to receive one-on-one hands-on air permitting assistance. Now, like I said, I'm kind of going to break down what ECAP does into two different categories. The first is going to be with technical assistance. Now, as I mentioned in the last slide, we do specialize in small businesses assistance, and specifically with questions related to air quality. Now, some of the technical assistance that we can do includes doing site visits. We can do potential emission calculations. For small businesses, we can help develop entire air permit applications and fill out any required forms. But we can also develop record keeping and reporting spreadsheets for air permit requirements. So a big one that we always get questions about are rolling total spreadsheets. Now, a really cool thing about Kentucky is that we have opted to make our SBEAP program multimedia, whereas some states may just focus on air quality because that's all that's required within the Clean Air Act. But in Kentucky, we actually staff a phone and email hotline to take in any requests from the general public or companies or facilities. So any questions regarding air, water, or waste in Kentucky, we can answer. We might not know the answer to them, but we can actually act as kind of a referral service and get you to somebody within the cabinet, or sometimes it may be somebody outside of the cabinet to get your question answered. Now, some of those topics that we get questions about can be things like KPDES permits, hazardous waste. We'll get questions about solid waste. And like I said, if we don't necessarily know the answer, we can refer you to somebody who better is able to answer your question. Now, I talked about that technical assistance that we do. On the other hand, we do a lot of education and outreach. So one of the ways that we do education outreach is by developing educational documents. Now, these can be anything from quick one-page fact sheets on new regulations to, I think, the longest one I've seen is maybe 120 pages on quite literally every potential regulation a facility in a specific sector might need to be concerned with. So all of these documents that we have created are housed online in our resource library. I do encourage you to check those out. If you ever have questions about any specific, regulation or something that your facility has to be concerned with, there's always a possibility that we have a document that's related to that. So feel free to check that out. I will mention that that is linked in this PowerPoint. So when I send this PowerPoint out later today, hopefully you'll be able to click on those links and check out our online resource library. We also have several videos that have been created related to air, waste, and water learning. We also have videos related to things like ECE forms, which is online submittal platform. Now, along with our ECAP Recap webinar series, we also host our Air, Water, and Waste 101 series, which is an introductory level workshop regarding air, water, and waste regulations. So right now, we just finished up our spring series and plan to have another Air, Water, and Waste 101 in the fall. And we're planning on doing this in a hybrid way, so both in person and online. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out and we will have more information regarding those fairly soon. Now, so far, I have talked a lot about what ECAP can do, but I do like to take a moment to note what ECAP cannot do. So ECAP does not issue NOVs, even if issues are seen during a site visit. ECAP does not make any sort of regulatory determination or give requirements. We do make recommendations to facilities. So we have no regulatory authority. Like I said in the beginning, we really are here to help. We also do not interfere with any inspector activity or anything that's covered in an inspection report. We have an enforcement discretion that I'm going to show in the next slide, and that will not supersede anything that has to do with what an inspector is looking at or looking for. And then last but not least, ECAP cannot act solely as a corrective action or a remedial measure following an inspection report or an NOV. We can assist facilities meet requirements, but we cannot be the remedial measure in itself. Now, I have mentioned a few times now that our services are confidential and we do not report on potential violations outside of a few exceptions. The Department for Environmental Protection did create this enforcement discretion policy for the program itself. And basically, the important part of this discretion is that facilities that work with the Environmental Compliance Assistance Program are given a reasonable opportunity to correct violations before they are brought to regulatory agencies. Now, finally, I'd like to end my talk about ECAP just by sharing some accomplishments that our program likes to talk about. These are not our most up-to-date, actually. I need to update these numbers to account for last year's data, but on average, we have 1,100 assistance requests per year, with 115 of those being detailed assistances. So those may be those small businesses that we're doing those air permit applications for their reporting and record keeping. 54% of our follow-up survey respondents are going to be small businesses. We have a 96% positive rating from respondents, with 94% saying that they would use our program again and recommend us to others. And then 87% of clients say that they do make changes based on the recommendations that we give to their facility. So with that being said, if you have any additional questions about the Environmental Compliance Assistance Program or any of the services that we do offer, you can feel free to reach out to us. At the end of today's webinar, I will have a slide up on the screen with our hotline email and phone number. This hotline goes directly to ECAP staff members, and we would really love to help you out. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to our guest speaker today, Ms. Kirsten O'Leary. Kirsten is the Kentucky Brownfield Program Coordinator, and we really appreciate her joining us today as she talks a little bit more about what the program is and what they do. So, Kirsten, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Shanna. Thank you all so much for having me today. Let me get my slides pulled up here. Any opportunity that I get to talk about brownfields is a good day to me. So again, my name is Kirsten O'Leary. I'm the State Brownfield Coordinator with the Department for Environmental Protection. I just want to start out with a little bit of history just to kind of provide some context for future slides. So CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, is also known as the Superfund Law. It was enacted in 1980 in response to growing public awareness of hazardous waste sites and their effect on human health and the environment. And a lot of you may be familiar with one of those sites that drew a lot of attention. It was the Valley of the Drums here in Kentucky in Bullitt County. And under CERCLA, entities are assigned strict liability. So that means that even if you didn't cause the contamination, if you possess or control the site, you can be held liable for the assessment and the cleanup costs for that site. So because of that, in the 80s and beyond, redevelopment was hindered because of fear of liability and the costs associated with cleanup at those properties. Not every contaminated site is a Superfund site, obviously, but Brownfields does fall under the Superfund law. So because of that hindrance to redevelopment, the Brownfield Act was passed in 2002, and that legislation amended CERCLA to promote redevelopment and provide liability protections for people that were innocent landowners. So if you did your due diligence, which we'll talk about later on in this presentation, but if you show that, hey, I'm not the one that caused this contamination, but I want to reuse the site and put it back into a productive reuse, then there are liability protections for people that do that. So the definition of a brownfield, I'll just go ahead and read. This is the only slide I'll read. But the definition of a brownfield, according to EPA, is real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. So the definition for brownfields allows for a lot of flexibility. It's a lot more broad, I think, than what you would initially expect. So some examples of brownfield sites include abandoned and blighted buildings, maybe that have like lead and asbestos contamination, former industries or factories, former gas stations, dry cleaners are especially contaminated, old rail yards, old schools and hospitals, even a vacant lot or warehouses. This is a picture of the former Hayeswood Hospital in Maysville, Kentucky, and they've recently, within the last couple of years, got a $2 million cleanup grant from EPA that allowed them to, they're currently working on it, remediating lead and asbestos within that building, and it's going to be a mixed-use residential development. So cleaning up these sites, putting them back into a productive reuse, back on the tax roll, and really like saving these beautiful buildings as well is something that we love about the program. So all of those sites in your community are opportunities for new entertainment and restaurants, park or recreation areas, new retail or commercial property, housing. Really, when you're thinking about applying for cleanup funding through an EPA cleanup grant, a brownfield grant, either they have a clear economic benefit or a community benefit when we're talking about reuse of those sites. This is the Waterfront Botanical Gardens in Louisville, Kentucky, and it was built on a former landfill site. They have received several loans through our revolving loan fund program that I'll detail in a few minutes, but just showing you some real life Kentucky examples of people that have benefited from brownfield redevelopment projects. Speaking of benefits, there are benefits to the community and for the developer when we're talking about redeveloping brownfield sites. So again, for the community, we're increasing the local tax base and facilitating job growth in some instances. You're utilizing existing infrastructure and saving our green space or green fields. And then expanding opportunities for that kind of live, work, play. A lot of these brownfield sites are being turned into mixed-use developments with commercial and housing or community spaces for the people in those areas to enjoy. In terms of the developer, there's a reduced price and potential for tax incentives that we have for redeveloping brownfields. They're often in a prime location with that existing infrastructure. There's favorable zoning, land use provisions. Often these sites have been sitting for a really long time. And so working with your local officials to redevelop that site provides a lot of opportunity for public support and potential partnerships along the way as well. But overall, the cleanup and redevelopment of brownfields is good for the overall economic and environmental health of your community. And here, I just wanted to point out, I won't read these, but I just wanted to point out that brownfield redevelopment happens in urban and rural communities across the country. So this is funds for a community center reception hall in Annville, Kentucky. And then also the Owensboro Riverfront is a very large scale brownfield redevelopment project. So, and a lot of times in urban communities, brownfield redevelopment happens without us playing a part in it, right? Like the environmental due diligence piece happens, remediation happens without the need for federal or state funding. So brownfield redevelopment is happening all the time, but I just wanted people to know that it's possible. Some of our largest cleanup grants that Kentucky has been awarded in the last several years have been in rural communities, Maysville, Irvin, Beattyville, places like that that are getting high dollar cleanup grants on a national stage. So just a little bit about our program structure. So of course, we're in the Energy and Environment Cabinet's Department for Environmental Protection. We are under the Division of Waste Management in the Superfund branch. So there's kind of a technical side of the Superfund branch and a non-technical side. So myself and my colleague Annabelle are on the non-technical side. So if you have questions about outreach and grant support and funding and those kind of things, that's going to be to me. And then anybody that's performing any kind of environmental side assessments or looking at applications for liability protections, those are kind of our more technical staff. So this is what our program services are. All of our services are offered to local governments, quasi-governmental agencies like your area development district, and 501c3 nonprofit organizations. And I'll get into each of these. So our targeted brownfield assessments, our TBAs, are offered at no cost to all of those eligible entities. So phase 1s, phase 2s, a document that we call an analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives, which is basically just a cost estimate of all the different reuse options of a site and what it would take to get there. And then also asbestos and lead-based paint surveys. A phase 1 environmental site assessment is the most critical part of the assessment process. It's essentially a book report about the property, and it's a common environmental due diligence process for commercial property transactions. So oftentimes, a bank will require a phase 1 environmental site assessment for commercial property transactions that might have a potential for environmental contamination. And you can get those at no cost through our program. And the phase 1 utilizes historical information, interviews, visual site inspections to determine the likelihood of contamination. So based on a phase one report, you're not saying yes or no, definitively this property is or is not contaminated. You're just saying that based on the past uses of this property, whether it was a dry cleaner or an old rail yard or something like that, there is likely to be some contamination present based on those historical uses of the property. And a phase one, and this is why I say it's the most critical, is required prior to property transfer. It only matters in relation to the property transfer date. It's required for liability protections. Being a bona fide prospective purchaser, or a BFPP, is what you want to be. So that gives you a defense to that CERCLA liability that we talked about in the beginning. So doing your phase one prior to 180 days prior to purchase or acquisition of a property enables you to be a bona fide prospective purchaser. There's also a couple other requirements, like it can't be your brother's property that you bought. You can't have any connection to the cause of the contamination. You can't have been employed at that facility and caused the contamination. There's a few other things, but mainly it's getting your phase one prior to acquisition of the property to be eligible for liability protections, cleanup grants and loans, and anything that means anything through our state program or through federal EPA. You would not be eligible for any of those if you did not get a phase one prior to purchase. And so there is a timeline associated with those. The report expires after 180 days, but after 180 days, you can have an update to the report up to 365 days. So if you're within a year of acquiring a commercial property, you need a phase one prior to the actual acquisition. So based on the results of a phase one, it's either going to say, yes, we recommend phase two sampling, or no, we don't really see any environmental risk here at this property. So if phase one recommends further sampling, that is most of the time either like a phase two or the asbestos and lead-based paint surveys. And that sampling will identify the types and the levels of contamination present at the site. Most contaminated properties, whether they're brownfields or Superfund sites, can be remediated to reduce or eliminate risk of exposure. So the cleanup standards for brownfield cleanups depend on the type and the extent of the contamination, and then also the intended property use. So everything is done on a risk-based cleanup scale. This is a graphic from EPA that shows that, if you are redeveloping something into a residence, more cleanup is going to be needed. There are people that are going to be potentially living at those sites 24/7, 365. You have elderly populations and infant populations that are in their homes all the time, that we want to make sure that everything is good for and healthy for, and that there's no risk of exposure. So more cleanup is needed for a residential site than a industrial site or a commercial site, where we have systems in place, monitoring in place to make sure that everything is safe for the workers there. So we also offer technical assistance. So we do in-house targeted brownfield assessments. We also contract some of those out to qualified environmental professionals. We also do site management. Those technical people in our Superfund branch will review cleanup plans, issue managed closure letters, review those property management things that you need, property management plans that you would need to apply for liability protections with. They also review those liability protection applications, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. Also just general program navigation from start to end. So if any sites popped into your head when I was talking about, the phase one, feel free to give me a call. I can look up on our side if there's anything that's ever been done with that property on our end, and we can kind of talk through the property acquisition and what all of the requirements would be to do that and be that bona fide prospective purchaser. So our 415 liability relief program is based on the KRS statute, KRS 224.1-415, and it established a liability relief program that takes that bona fide prospective purchaser defense a step further. So when you acquire a property the right way and you are a bona fide prospective purchaser, you have a legal defense to circle liability. You're saying, hey, I didn't cause any of this contamination, and that it's a defense. But if it ever came up in court. But the 415 program allows for some more flexibility, some more concrete documentation when you are redeveloping a contaminated site. So someone, private or public, can receive documentation that they will not be held liable for characterization or corrective action at the site as long as they follow the property management plan. You're doing what you said you were going to do with the property. It's all based on the intended reuse of the site. So a prospective purchaser that applies for liability protections would get a notice of eligibility. And we've seen that some with banks. Instead of just requiring a phase one, we've had lenders recently that have required this notice of eligibility into the 415 program as a condition of the loan. And then once you are the current owner and you have the deed to the site, you get a notification of concurrence with that information on there that you will not be held responsible. There is a $2,500 application fee for the 415 program, but from what I've heard from other states, that is very, very, very reasonable. So we also offer outreach and planning, things like we're doing here today with the webinar series. We do Brownfield boot camps usually twice a year. We have a lot of partnerships with Kentucky League of Cities where we've developed a local officials guide to brownfield redevelopment. We also have a partnership with Blueprint Kentucky, formerly SEDIC, where we have a brownfield community assistance program that we work one-on-one with communities who are hoping to apply for EPA brownfield grants, whether that's assessment or cleanup. And we'll talk about the difference in those in just a minute. But also we can assist with community planning, facilitating visioning sessions for what maybe some potential reuse options of your brownfield sites might be. We can provide resource materials and assistance with that public involvement and brownfield education piece. In terms of the funding opportunities, what we do on our side is support EPA's federal brownfield grant process. So if you have questions along the way, we can help you with kind of timelines and providing example applications that have been successful. We also, if you're applying for EPA brownfield funding, you have to also submit with your application a letter of support from us. It's just a way, you know, we're gonna support your project, but it's just a way to make sure that the state is informed of applications that are being submitted to the federal level. And then we also operate a revolving loan fund for brownfield cleanups that we call the Cleaner Commonwealth Fund. And here's just kind of an overview of the federal and state funding available for brownfields. So on the federal side, you have assessment grants, which are to do those phase ones, phase twos, ABCAs, lead and asbestos surveys, things like that. Cleanup grants, which are just for the remediation of contaminants at brownfield sites. And then the multi-purpose grants are kind of a combination of the two, both assessment and cleanup. They also have small technical assistance grants, job training grants for training people how to do kind of remediation type jobs in brownfield redevelopment. And then you can apply to have your own revolving loan fund that you operate. There are two in the state of Kentucky. One is with Louisville Metro, and then ours. Those are the two operational RLFs in the state. For our Cleaner Commonwealth Fund loans for brownfield cleanups, it is 0% interest over 15 years, and it is 25% forgivable. So if you comply with all of the things that all of the paperwork and all of the reporting and everything like that, if you take out $100,000 loan, you only have to pay $75,000 of that back at 0% interest over 15 years. The payments are twice a year until the loan obligation is fulfilled. And there is funding available right now through our revolving loan fund program for brownfield cleanup. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. Just a little note on EPA brownfield grants. Assessment grants are great for if you have a lot of properties within kind of a specific geographical area that need assessment work. So we've had cities apply for assessment grants. We've had area development districts apply, and you have to list several target areas within that application and also a couple of priority sites within those applications. So they have a lot of flexibility. There's money for planning also within an assessment grant, money to inventory sites. There's a lot of things that you can do with an assessment grant. And if you are a single entity applying for assessments, you can apply for up to $500,000. And then if you are partnering with like an area development district, if they partner with a city or nonprofit organization, I think it's you have to at least have 2 partner organizations and 1 lead entity. Then you can apply or last year it was up to 1.2 million, and they call that an assessment coalition grant. So another benefit of an EPA assessment grant is they can do assessments through that on behalf of local developers. So instead of like our program, we can do those assessments at no cost, but it has to be on behalf of a local government, quasi-governmental agency, or 501c3 nonprofit. The assessment grants through EPA, you can do that on behalf of the developer. So a lot of people use those assessment grants as an economic development tool. We're getting sites ready. The more that you know about a site, the easier it is to market that site and have a clear picture of what, if any, environmental issues are at the property. For cleanup grants, last year, there were 3 tiers of funding for cleanup grants. Each gets more competitive kind of as they go up. But the first tier was between 0 and 500,000. The next tier was between 500,000 and 2 million, and then between 2 million and 4 million. So just to kind of hopefully we'll have that same level of funding this fall. And that's typically when solicitations are due, are like mid-November, close to Thanksgiving. They're usually out sometime in September. So it's a 60-day turnaround time to get that submitted. And for cleanup grants, you must own the property before submitting an application. And you also have to be one of those eligible entities to apply for any of the EPA brownfield funding. So we offer grant assistance, grant writing workshops. We can review draft proposals and then just provide general, like I said, knowing what the federal grant process is for brownfield grants. We're happy to give you that information. Also, I just wanted to plug the New Jersey Institute of Technology is our technical assistance to brownfields provider. They have a great, what they do a lot of webinars, they do grant critique services that we've had really, really, really good luck with. They've come to Kentucky multiple times and we appreciate their involvement, but they support the whole region, EPA Region 4. So kind of in summary, navigating a brownfield redevelopment project, if you want to redevelop a brownfield site, no, then the property is likely to remain a burden, probably get even worse over time as those properties sit and deteriorate. If yes, then you can take action to identify, assess, and then clean up that property. So what that kind of looks like at a 10,000-foot view is identifying the site and owner. Is it feasible for, your entity to get ownership of that property? Conducting those site assessments, and the site assessments are conducted on behalf of a potential purchaser. So you don't have to own the site when you're applying for those assessments. We just have to have the ability, we have to have a access agreement from the current owner that will allow us to do that assessment work on the property. So conducting site assessments, considering liability protections, whether you want to be a member of or participant of the 415 program. You're deciding site reuse and cleanup. Sometimes, depending on how contaminated a property is, there may be limitations on what you can do with that property. And I will say that EPA has really been a proponent of having the community involved in site reuse options. People that have been burdened by these sites for a long time, they want them to have some input into what they see in their community when reusing that site. So having those community conversations and then seeking assistance and funding, not only for the brownfield side of things, right? Because brownfield funding is a tool that you can use for redevelopment. It's not going to pay for the entirety of your redevelopment project. It's going to pay for some of the planning, some of the assessment work, and then maybe some of the environmental cleanup. But typically, brownfield funding does not pay for demolition or construction of sites. So you're thinking about leveraging funds and seeking other assistance and funding to complete your redevelopment project. So there is a little bit of gray area there in terms of it will pay for some construction and demolition, but it's very site specific. So if you have site specific questions, feel free to email me or give me a call. If you have any general questions at this point in the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will get to those at the end. But kind of like to echo what Shanna said, if you remember nothing else from what I said, remember that conducting a phase 1 is the only time critical piece of this process. Get your phase 1 first before you acquire a commercial property. So whether that is someone donating a piece of property to a local government, anything that is a voluntary acquisition. So if you're bidding on a site at auction, if you are buying a piece of property for $1, if you're buying a piece of property for $500,000, get a phase 1 first. All other components of the redevelopment process can be addressed kind of as needed once a phase 1 is complete. So I will say that there is a caveat to this. I hesitate just because it's a lot of information, but in general, a phase 1 must be conducted prior to property acquisition in order to pursue any of those brownfield benefits, like the liability protections, the funding, etc. There are exemptions to CERCLA liability for eligible government entities that acquired property prior to January 11th, 2002, in which they did not cause the contamination of. So if you are a local government that has owned a building since, the 1700s, like if you have an old jail, and it has lead and asbestos in it. You can be eligible for assessment and cleanup funding for that site without having to do a phase 1 first. So if there's anything, we can definitely talk through any site specific questions that you have. But there's that. And then also if you're a local government that has acquired ownership of a property involuntarily, like think through abandonment or tax delinquency, things like that, you also would not have had to have a phase 1 first before you're eligible for those things. So if you're in any of those situations, feel free to call me and we can kind of talk it out and figure out the best way forward. But overall, our primary goal is to help you navigate the redevelopment process and how Brownfield fits into that, whether you need help assessing sites or applying for grants and loans, seeking partnerships in your redevelopment project, or understanding the liability protection aspect of it. We're here to help. And here is my contact information and my colleague Annabelle McKee's information, and then our general brownfields@ky.gov email address goes to both of us. So feel free to reach out with any questions. I did see at least one question. Sarah, is there a maximum amount for the RLF grant loan funding? It's really just based on funding availability at the time. It depends on how many other projects that we have interested, but we were granted $1 million supplemental loan to our RLF just a couple years ago, and we spent a little bit of that, but a majority of that is still available right now. In terms of like Louisville's RLF program, I'm not sure exactly how much they have available, but our goal is to keep this revolving so that we're able to utilize this funding for a long time to help assist with brownfield cleanup projects. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't see any. Shanna?
I'm not seeing any either, but I think Kirsten would say the same thing if you have any questions, as she's mentioned a few times. Feel free to reach out to her, reach out to Annabelle, reach out to that general Brownfields email, because they're more than happy to help. Fun fact, Kirsten and I used to work together because Brownfields used to be in the environmental assistance branch with us. So it's always good to have you come back and speak with us, and you always have such great information to share. So really, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead. Oh, I accidentally turned my camera off and share my screen one more time just before we leave today so I can show you just a little bit more information. Let's see if I can get it pulled up. There we go. Okay, I'm going to start at the beginning, of course. So I did just want to leave by sharing our upcoming events. As I said when I spoke in the beginning, be on the lookout for our fall 2025 Air, Water, and Waste 101 dates. We should be putting some information out there within the next couple of months regarding dates and locations and times and everything. So follow along for more information on that. And then our next ECAP recap webinar is actually going to be on July 9th. We'll have some speakers from the Kentucky Division of Enforcement here in the Department for Environmental Protection. They're coming in and they're talking about how to address a notice of violation if you were ever to receive one. So I am really excited about that event as well. I think it'll be super informative and really looking forward to that one. So when you get these slides, if you want to look at our upcoming events and register for any of them, feel free to click on that link that's on website, and it'll take you right to all of our events. And then finally, with that being said, again, if you ever have any questions about ECAP, Kentucky Brownfield Program, air, water, waste, anything, feel free to reach out to our phone number or email hotline that's right there on the screen. We would be more than happy to help you out. Kirsten, are you still on? It looks like we got another question that just came in.
Yes, so our 501(c)(3 is eligible for free phase ones for all property acquisitions, or just those as part of a large site redevelopment with known contamination? No. You're eligible for phase ones for all property acquisitions, as long as it has to kind of fall within that definition of a brownfield. So a site where there's the presence or potential presence of environmental contamination. So based on whatever the site was, if you think that there might be some environmental issues, and it kind of falls within that definition, then you would be eligible for phase ones through our program, for sure.
Great question. So I will stay on for a couple more minutes after we finish up here, and if you have any questions, feel free to put them in, and we will get back to you. So with that being said, that's all that we have for you all today. We thank you again for joining us this morning. Hopefully you learned some new things and can take some information back to your facilities or your job, whatever that may be. And we hope to see you again soon. So have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks for joining.